Sold to a saloon at 13. Now dying, a Lakota chief took her in and gave her dignity. There is a word in my language, Wachintignaka, that does not translate cleanly. It means something like, to carry another person's pain inside your own chest, not to pity them, not to solve their wound, just to hold it there, inside you, as if it were your own bruised rib. My grandmother taught me that word. She said the strongest men she had ever known were the ones who could do that without breaking. I am telling you this first because everything that follows depends on it. Because the morning I found the woman on the east rim of the canyon, that is exactly what happened to me. I felt her pain go inside my chest like a stone thrown into still water. And I have never been the same kind of man since. My name in English is something the traders called Running Elk, though it was not truly my name. My name, the one my father gave me at the fire when I was 7 winters old, means something closer to the man who does not look away. I will not tell you that name in this telling. It belongs to the people who were there. But I want you to know it exists because it matters. Because the whole of what I am about to say has something to do with not looking away. I was 53 winters old the spring this happened. I had been chief of my band for 14 years, since my father's brother passed the pipe to me in the winter of the deep snows, when the elk would not come, and we ate the last of the dried corn and waited to see who the land would take. She did not take me. She has not taken me yet, though I have given her many reasons to try. By that spring I had seen more than most men see. I had fought soldiers in 2 wars I did not want. I had watched my first wife die of the fever that the traders' blankets carried into our camp in the 3rd year of our marriage. I had seen my eldest son ride away to join a band further north, and I had not seen him since 8 winters by that point, maybe 9. I had buried 2 daughters before they were old enough to say my name properly. I had signed 3 papers for the government men, and each paper had taken something. Land, a river, a hunting ground that the grandfathers had given us, and that the grandfathers' grandfathers had kept before them. I had learned that a paper with your mark on it was mostly a way of making you forget what you already owned. I had a second wife, bright morning, a good woman, a steady woman. She had given me a son who was 11 that spring, a boy named Chayton, which means falcon. She kept our lodge warm and our stores careful, and I respected her. I want to be plain about that. I did not feel for her what I had felt for my first wife, the way a river feels about its own banks. But there was loyalty between us, and in a man's middle years sometimes loyalty is the larger gift. I say all of this so you understand what kind of man I was that spring. A man with a great deal of history behind him and not so much certainty ahead. A man who had learned that the things the world takes from you do not come back, and had made a kind of peace with that, or thought he had. Then I rode to the east rim of the canyon to check on the horse herd, and the peace broke apart. She was lying in the dry grass at the base of a juniper, and at first I thought she was dead. The horse herd was 30 yards south and paying her no attention at all, which meant she had been there long enough to become part of the landscape, long enough for the horses to stop caring. I got down and went to her. She was white, maybe 35 years old, though it was hard to say because of the condition she was in. Her dress had been a saloon dress once, you could tell from the color, a green that had been bright when it was bought and was now the color of something past the point of saving. She had no shoes. Her feet were torn. She had a fever you could feel from 6 inches away, a fever that came off her like heat off a stove, and she was breathing in a way that meant the lungs were struggling. I put my hand on her forehead, and her eyes opened. They were gray, not the gray of storm clouds or cold iron, a lighter gray, the color of sky just before it decides whether it will rain or not. Eyes that had seen a great deal and had stopped flinching at what they saw, which is a different thing from being empty. There is a kind of toughness that gets worn into a person and becomes the whole of their face. She had it. She looked at me and she did not look afraid. I noticed that. Women of the settlements, when they saw me in those years, they usually looked afraid, or they looked the other way, or they made their children look away as though I were something that would mark their eyes permanently. This woman looked at me the way you look at a tree when you are lost, like she was trying to figure out if she could rely on it. She said something. Her voice was almost gone, just a scrape of sound. It took me a moment to make out the English words. She said, "You real?" I said I was. She said, "Thought I was done." I said she might still be done, but that I would like to try to prevent it. That was either funny to her or she was beyond laughing and had come to the place where you do what you can with what you have left. Either way, the corner of her mouth moved. Then her eyes closed again and I picked her up and carried her to my horse. She did not weigh much. That bothered me more than the fever. I brought her to the camp and there was talk. There is always talk. You do not live with 30 families in a band without talk being one of the chief activities available to people. My second wife, Bright Morning, came out of the lodge and looked at the woman in my arms and looked at me in the way that a practical woman looks at a practical problem, without anger and without particular warmth. She said, "What happened to her?" I said, "I don't know yet. She needs water and fire and whatever you know about fever." Bright Morning was a skilled healer. Her mother had been a medicine woman and she had learned most of what her mother knew. She was not warm about it this particular morning, but she was competent, and in an emergency competence is what you want. We put the white woman in the second lodge, the one we used for visitors and supplies, and once, for a single bad winter, for a horse that needed to be inside to survive. Bright Morning brought medicines and water, and an older woman from the camp named. She walked straight came to help without being asked, because that is the kind of woman she was. Two of the younger men, cousins, came and stood at a distance and spoke to each other in low voices. One of them was named Red Calf. He was 22 years old and had opinions about everything. I heard the word for trouble several times in their conversation. I did not go to them. I let them talk. By midday, the white woman's fever had come down enough that she was conscious in a more complete way, answering questions, tracking the room with those gray eyes, taking water when it was offered. She told me her name was Mabel Storch. I asked her where she had come from and she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Been a lot of places. Last one was Ridley Creek." I knew Ridley Creek. There was a settlement there, maybe 40 miles east. There had been a trading post and then a saloon and then more saloons and then the kind of town that builds itself around what men want when they are far from home and have money in their pockets. I asked her how she had come to be in my canyon with no shoes. She said, "Got run off." I said, "By who?" She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Man named Croft, runs the Silver King. Said I was too sick to work and he wasn't going to feed something that couldn't earn. Took my boots because he said they belonged to the house." I sat with that for a moment. I said, "How long have you worked there?" She said, "Ridley Creek, 3 years, maybe 4. Before that was Calvert, before that Orem, before that some others. Started in Abilene. I was 13 when they brought me to Abilene." She said it the same way you'd say I was born in Missouri. Not without feeling. I don't think she was a woman without feeling. I came to know that later, but with the flatness of something that has been carried so long it has worn the rough places smooth. I said, "How old are you now?" She said, 38, think so anyway, lost track once somewhere in there. 25 years. I did not say anything to that, but I held it in my chest the way my grandmother had described. Wachintignaka, the stone dropping into still water. I did not sleep much that night. I sat outside my lodge under the stars and I thought about what I was going to do. This was the question, and it was a real one, because nothing about it was simple. I was a Lakota chief in the year 1881. I want to be clear about the time because the time matters. The treaties were all broken. The reservations were being pressed smaller every year. The soldiers had come and gone and come again, and every time they left there was less of us and less of the land. We were not at war. I had made the choice, years ago, that more war meant more dying and I had seen enough dying. But we were not at peace either. We existed in the way that a man exists when someone has his arm behind his back and is deciding whether to push further. You keep your feet. You watch your breathing. You wait. Having a white woman in my camp was the kind of thing that could bring soldiers down on us for reasons that had nothing to do with the truth of what had happened. I knew that. Every man in the camp knew that. Red Calf came to me before dawn and said what I already knew he was going to say. He squatted down across from me and looked at the fire for a while, and then he said, "She will cause trouble." I said, "She is sick. She is not causing anything." He said, "She came from Ridley Creek." I said, "I know where she came from." He said, "When she is better they will come for her, and then it will be our fault whatever she did or didn't do." I said, "She didn't do anything. She was put out in the canyon with no shoes by a man who decided she had no further use to him." Red Calf was quiet. Then he said, "She is not our problem." I looked at him. He was a young man, good in many ways, brave, not stupid, but 22 years old, which meant he had not yet had a chance to see how the things you walk past have a way of staying with you. I said, "When you are old you will understand that everything is your problem. Everything you had a chance to help and did not is your problem. It comes back to you. I have lived long enough to know that." He didn't argue, he went away, but I knew the argument wasn't finished. Over the next week, Mabel Storch came back from where she had been heading. Bright Morning knew what she was doing, and the woman was tough underneath the sickness in a way that I had suspected from the first moment. She opened those gray eyes and asked me if I was real. She had a constitution that had been hardened by years of use and not much care, and it held. She learned the shape of the camp quickly. She was not the kind of person who needed to be told things twice. She watched she walk straight, do the morning work, and offered to help on the third day, before she was fully steady on her feet. And she walked straight, looked at her for a long moment, and then handed her a basket, and showed her what to do without saying a single word. They worked together all morning, and I watched from a distance, and I thought, she knows how to be among people she doesn't know. That takes a particular kind of intelligence, and she had it. Her English had a sound I couldn't quite place, not east, not south, something in between, with a flatness to the vowels that might have been from the plains or might have been something the years had done to her voice. She didn't talk much, but when she talked she was direct. She did not perform a thing. She said what she thought and she meant it. I asked her one morning, when she was sitting outside in the sun which the healer in me knew she needed, what she had been doing before Abilene, before she was 13. She looked at me for a moment. She said, "Farm, Missouri. My father sold me, owed a man money, and I was what he had." I said, "Your father?" She said, "I don't call him that anymore. Stopped about a year in. Easier that way." I thought about my own father. About what a father was supposed to be. A man who stands between you and the hard world until you are big enough and skilled enough to stand there yourself, and then a man who stands beside you. I thought about what it would mean to be a man who looked at his daughter and saw a debt he could pay. I said, "I'm sorry that happened to you." She looked at me like I had said something unexpected, not bad unexpected, just unexpected, like she had forgotten that was a thing people said. Then she nodded once, a small solid nod, and looked back out at the plain. She said, "You don't have to be sorry, not your doing." I said, "A man can be sorry for a thing without being responsible for it." She thought about that, then she said, "I suppose that's true." That was the first real conversation we had. Not the last. The trouble I had expected came at the end of the second week. 3 men rode into camp from the east. They were carrying rifles across their saddles in the particular way that means they want you to notice the rifles, and one of them was a big, soft-looking man with a black hat who I did not need to be introduced to. I knew what a saloon owner looked like. I had met enough of them. His name was Croft, and he was the kind of man who had made a life from owning things and then deciding what those things were worth, and then selling them again when the value dropped below what he needed. He had that quality about him, The way he looked at everything, including people, as line items in a calculation. He said he was there to collect his property. I said, "What property?" He said, "The woman, Mabel, she works for me, she ran off." I said, "She didn't run off, she has no shoes, you put her in the canyon." He said her shoes were his shoes, part of the debt she owed him. He had a list, he said, of what she owed him. 3 years of room and board and care. He had provided for her and she owed that back. He said it all very evenly, like a man reading a church ledger. I stood and looked at him for a while. The 2 men with him had the rifles now pointing more deliberately in my direction, not aimed, but tilted. I had 12 men in the camp who were watching all of this from various points. I had 2 rifles and about a dozen bows. I was not going to start anything, but I was also not going to move. I said, "She is sick. She stays until she is well." He said, "She's mine. I'll decide when she's well enough." I said, "She does not belong to you." He said that was a matter of law, and that I might not fully understand how law worked. I have found in my life that men who say things like that usually mean, "I am large and you are not, and I intend to use that difference." But I have also found that there are ways to be larger than your size. My father taught me this. He was not a tall man, my father, but when he stood still and looked at you, you felt it in your spine. I looked at Croft. I did not say anything. I let the silence go on until he shifted in his saddle. Then I said, "There are 23 families in this camp. There are men here who have been in more fights than you have had winters. There are women here who have carried worse trouble than you without flinching. If you take this woman from here by force, I cannot promise what happens after that. And I can promise that what happens after that will follow you." I said, "On the other hand, if you ride away right now, what happens here stays here." Croft looked at the 2 men with him. One of them, the younger one, closer to a boy than a man, probably hired for the ride and not the fight, had gone pale. The other one was trying to decide what Croft was going to do before committing himself. Croft said, "This isn't finished." I said, "No, but today it is." He turned his horse and they rode east, and I watched until they were a line, and then a point, and then nothing. Red Calf came to stand beside me. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "3 of them." I said, "Yes." He said, "We could have handled 3. I said, "We could have, but handling 3 usually means there are 30 behind them. The trick is to make 3 feel like enough on their own." Red Calf was quiet again. "Then you think he'll come back?" I said, "Maybe, but probably not. Men like that look for things that don't cost them too much. We told him this would cost him. He'll find something cheaper to spend himself on." I went back to the camp. Mabel was standing at the edge of the second lodge, having watched the whole thing. She looked at me when I came close. She said, "You didn't have to do that." I said, "I know." She said, "He has connections. The sheriff in Ridley Creek, other men." I said, "I know that too." She looked at me for a moment, those gray sky eyes, and she said, "Why?" I said, "Because it was right." She looked like she was going to say something else. Instead, she looked down at her feet. She had moccasins now, a pair she walked straight had made for her the 3rd day, and she nodded, that same small, solid nod I was beginning to recognize as the thing she did when something mattered to her, and she didn't have the words for it yet. I went about the rest of my day. What I want to tell you now is harder to tell, not because it is shameful. It is not shameful. But it is the kind of thing that a man in his middle years sometimes keeps close, because he has learned that the things he keeps close are the things that last. Over the weeks that followed, Mabel Storch became part of the shape of the camp in the way that things that belong somewhere find their place eventually. She learned enough of the language to be useful and to be decent. She had a good ear and a quick mind, and she did not pretend she understood something when she did not, which is a rarer quality than it ought to be. She helped you walk straight. She spent time with the children in the way that a woman who never had children of her own sometimes does, cautious at first. then less cautious, then completely at ease in the particular way of children who do not see the things that adults use to separate themselves. She was good with my son Chayton. He was 11 and had the energy of 3 boys and the curiosity of 10, and she talked to him like he was a real person rather than a child, which he immediately recognized, and which made him follow her around like a dog that has found its person. I watched them one afternoon, her teaching him to make something with cord, some sailor's knot she had learned somewhere, some port or river town, and I felt something move in my chest. I did not name it then. I want to be honest about that. I did not sit down and say to myself, this is what is happening. I just watched my boy laughing with this woman and felt something warm and unfamiliar in the middle of my body. Bright Morning noticed she was not a woman who missed things. She came to me one evening when the camp was quiet and the fire was low, and she said what I expected her to say, with the directness that I had always appreciated about her even when it was uncomfortable. She said, "You have feelings for the white woman." I said, "I don't know yet." She said, "I do." I looked at her. She looked back at me steadily. She was not angry, I want to be clear about that. Bright Morning was not an angry woman. She was a realistic one. She had known when she married me that I had loved another woman first and that I had not fully recovered from that loss. She had built a life with me on the foundation of what was real rather than on what she might have wished for. She said, "I have respected you for 14 years. You have been a good chief and a fair husband and a careful father. I am not asking you to choose." I said, "Then what are you asking?" She said, "I'm asking you to be honest, with yourself and with me, the way you have always been." I said, "I think she is a remarkable person. I think she has survived things that would have ended most people, and she has not let those things take her good nature, and I find that extraordinary. I think I want to help her rebuild whatever she allows herself to have. I don't know yet what I feel beyond that." Bright Morning looked at the fire for a while. Then she said, "That is more than most men would say, and more than most men would know about themselves." I did not answer. She said, "The Lakota way allows for this. You know that." I said, "I know." She said, "What I would ask is that you not let it make our arrangement into a lie. If it is real, you bring her in honestly. If it is not real, you don't let it go on until it becomes cruelty. I have enough respect for you to ask for that." I said, "You have my word." She nodded and went inside, and I sat with the fire a while longer, and I thought about what it meant to be a man who had been honest in his answer. Most men, I think, are not that honest with themselves. They know a thing but they don't say it out loud even to themselves, and the not saying allows them to continue without choosing. I had chosen to say it, and saying it made it realer than it had been 5 minutes before. Mabel and I began talking in a way that had no name but was different from the way I talked to the others. Not private exactly. We did not hide ourselves, but deliberate. We walked the edge of the canyon in the evenings when the light went gold and the horses were grazing and the day's work was done, and we talked about the things that a person accumulates in a life and does not often get the chance to say out loud. She told me about Abilene. She told me about it carefully in pieces, the way you take apart something complicated when you don't know if the pieces can survive being shown to air. I did not push her for any of it. I let it come when it came. The man who had run the first saloon, a man named Pudge, of all the names, a round, cheerful man who was also capable of things that erased the cheerfulness without any warning. The way she had learned early that her survival depended on understanding what people wanted and giving them enough of it that they would not take more. The way she had kept a small wooden box under whatever bed she slept in, over all those years and all those places, with the few things in it that were purely hers. A coin from Missouri, a button that had been on the coat her mother wore the last time Mabel had seen her. A square of paper with a drawing on it that a cowboy had made for her once, just because, just kindness with no payment attached, and she had kept it because it was the only time she could remember a man doing something for her without wanting something back. I told her about my first wife, about the fever, about the 2 nights at the inn when I had not left the lodge and had held her hand through the worst of it, and she had spoken to me in words that I could no longer remember the sound of, which was the part that hurt the most, not the loss. The way the sound of her voice had gone from a thing that lived inside me to a thing that lived only in a part of my memory I could not always find. I told her about my son riding north and not coming back, about the papers and what they had cost, about the particular loneliness of being responsible for 30 families, being the one they looked to, being the one who had to carry everything in a direction that felt like the right direction and might not be, and having no one to turn that responsibility over to at the end of the day. Being the chief meant being the last person who got to put down the weight, and I had been putting it down in the dark, alone, for a long time. She listened to all of it. She listened the way that people who have been talked past and talked around for most of their lives listen when someone finally talks to them, completely, without planning her response, without waiting for the end so she could speak, just present with it. She said one evening, "You've been carrying a lot of people." I said, "That's the job." She said, "But who carries you?" I looked at her. The canyon light was doing what it does at that hour, turning everything the color of embers, copper and rose, the juniper going dark against it. I said, "Mostly I carry myself." She said, "I know what that's like." I said, "I think you might know it better than almost anyone I've met." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "I think people like us, the ones who have been carrying ourselves so long, we forget that you're allowed to put it down sometimes, that there's someone who might want to carry some of it for you." The way she said it, not with tenderness that cost her nothing, with the plain truthfulness of a woman who had survived 38 years of no one holding anything for her, and had arrived, somehow, on the other side of all of it with her ability to care still intact. That was the part that undid me, not the words, the fact that she still had it to give. I didn't say anything for a while. Then I said, "I think you might be right. I am going to tell you what happened between us plainly, because I have no patience for telling things sideways." I asked her if she would stay, not as something I owned, not as a debt or an obligation or a repayment for anything I had done. I told her that plainly, that what I had done because it was right, and that I wanted nothing back from it. But that I was asking, as a man asking a woman, if she would stay with me and be part of the life I was trying to keep together in a world that was pressing against it from every side. She was quiet for a long time. I did not fill the quiet. I let it be what it was. She said, "I don't know how to be a wife. I've never been one. I don't know what the customs are here, what would be expected of me." I said, "No one is born knowing those things." She said, "I'm a white woman. You're a Lakota chief. The world out there is going to have something to say about that." I said, "The world out there has been having things to say about me for 40 years. I've stopped arranging my life around what the world out there is likely to say." She almost smiled at that, not quite but close. She said, "I'm not a young woman. I'm not whole. There are things about me that are broken that won't come back." I said, "I know. I've been watching a woman who is supposed to be broken make moccasins with she walks straight and teach my son sailors knots and walk 6 miles of canyon trail on feet that had no skin on them 3 weeks ago. I've been watching what you call broken, and I don't think we're using the same word." She looked at me then, straight at me, not away, not at the ground or the sky or the middle distance. At me. She said, "You see me?" I said, "Yes." She said, "People don't usually." I said, "I know." There was a long quiet. The horses moved in the grass below. Somewhere across the camp someone was singing an old woman's song, the kind you sing without thinking, just to fill the evening. Then she said, "Yes." Just that, yes. I put my hand out and she put hers in it. Her hand was smaller than mine, and the skin of it was rough from years of work, and it was the most real thing I had held in a very long time. We stood there at the edge of the canyon with the last of the light going out of the sky, and I felt something in my chest that I had not felt in so many years that I had forgotten the shape of it. Not happiness exactly, solidity. The feeling of the ground under your feet being exactly as firm as you thought it was, of standing where you are supposed to stand, of being recognized as a man in full by a woman who does not give that recognition cheaply. That is the feeling. I'm trying to tell it to you plain, without dressing it up in words that aren't mine. The woman who had been sold and worn down and put in a canyon to die had looked at me, a man who had lost his first love and his son and his land, and had been carrying 30 families for 14 years, and she had said yes. And in saying yes, she had given me back something I had not known I was missing until that moment. She had given me back the feeling of being worth staying for. Croft did not come back. I was right about the cost calculation. When I thought about it later, I was almost certain he had come the first time more from habit and wounded pride than from any real belief he was owed something. A man like that will push until he feels the push back, and when he feels it, he finds a softer place to push. We were not a softer place. He found elsewhere to spend himself, and that was the end of him in our story. The sheriff from Ridley Creek did come once, about a month later. A thin, careful man named Aldous, who came alone and without his rifle on his saddle, and who seemed, after about 10 minutes of conversation, to be primarily interested in making sure that there was not going to be any trouble that would land on his desk. I told him there was not going to be any trouble. He looked around the camp with the eyes of a man taking inventory, and he looked at Mabel standing outside the lodge with Chayton, and he looked at me. Then he said something that surprised me. He said, "Croft runs a dirty operation. I've known it for years. Not much I can do about it, but I've known it." He paused. Then he said, "She looks better than she has in a long time." I said, "She does." He nodded once and rode back east, and I never saw him again. There were other things over the years. There are always other things. The reservation people came twice to talk about moving the camp, and twice I told them we would not move. The second time they came with a soldier, and I told the soldier the same thing I had told the civilian, which is that the land we were on had not been in any treaty I had signed, and that if they could show me a paper that said otherwise I would look at it carefully, but that absent such a paper we would remain. They went away and came back 6 months later with a paper, and the paper was what I had expected, vague, wide, badly translated, claiming more than it could honestly claim. I kept a copy of it, and for the next 3 years I sent letters to the government office with specific questions about the paper that they never answered, and I believe the not answering was a strategy of attrition, to wear me down through silence. It did not wear me down. But that is another story for another day. I am telling you the story of Mabel Storch and what she came to mean, and I do not want to lose the thread of that in the larger story of what the land meant and what the years cost. She learned the language. Not perfectly, she would never be perfect at it, and she knew that and was matter-of-fact about the limitations, but well enough to be real in it. She had the same quality with the language that she had with everything else. She didn't pretend. She would say a thing wrong and look at whoever she was talking to and say it again until it was right, without embarrassment, without apology, just the plain persistence of a woman who had decided something was worth doing. She walked straight became her closest companion in the camp. They were, on the surface, very different women. She walked straight had spent her whole life inside the band, had lost 2 husbands to the wars and had grandchildren now, was a woman who had earned her authority in the particular way that some women earn it, slowly and completely, until everyone just knows. But underneath, they had the same thing. The same quality of endurance that doesn't require an audience. The same way of doing what needs to be done without seeking recognition for it. I told Mabel once that she walked straight were the same kind of woman in different wrapping. She said, "She told me the same thing about us." I said, "When?" She said, "About a week after I got here." She said you were a man who recognized what he needed before he knew he needed it, and that she thought I was what you needed. I said, she walked straight said that. She said it in Lakota, but that was what it meant. I thought about that for a while. She walked straight had known before I did. That seemed right. She was that kind of woman. Chayton grew up with her as a steady presence in his life, which meant he grew up knowing that the world was wider than most boys allowed themselves to know. He grew up knowing that a woman could be tough and funny and capable of hard work, and also could have a past that didn't define her. He grew up seeing his father love someone openly, which I think was a gift, though I did not intend it as one. I was just living my life, and he was watching it the way children watch everything. When he was 17, he rode south to find work, the way young men do, and before he left he came to us both, to me and to Mabel, and he embraced us, and then he looked at Mabel and said, in English because he knew she would carry it better in her first language, "You made my father a whole person again. I want you to know that I saw it." She did not cry. She had not cried in front of anyone since she arrived, as far as I knew, and she did not cry then. But her face did something, a tightening, then a releasing, and she put her hand on the side of his face and said, "You are going to be extraordinary. You already are." He rode away and I watched him go, and Mabel stood beside me, and the canyon behind us was going gold in the afternoon light, and I felt the weight of all of it, the years and the losses and the things that had cost me, but also this right here, the solid fact of her presence beside me, her choosing to stay, her being the person she was. I thought of my grandmother's word, Wachintignaka, to carry another person's pain inside your own chest. I had carried Mabel's pain inside my own chest since the morning I found her. And she had carried mine since the evening she asked me who carried me, and I had said mostly I carry myself. And she had recognized in that answer the particular loneliness of a man who has been the rock for so long, he has forgotten that rocks need something underneath them too. That is the thing I want to say to you if you have been listening to all of this. Not a lesson. I am not the kind of man who tells you what to think at the end of a story, but a thing that is true. There are men who go through their lives doing the right thing, holding the weight, being the steady one, providing and protecting and standing between the people they are responsible for and the hard world. And those men are often invisible to the recognition they are owed. Not because the world is only cruel, it isn't, but because the world is busy and the steady man is, by nature, the one who doesn't make noise. He just holds, and holding doesn't make noise. And then sometimes, not always, but sometimes, a woman comes along who has been through her own version of the fire, and she knows what she is looking at when she looks at a man who has been holding. And she says, "I see you," and she means it. And that is, I don't have an English word for what that is. In my language there is something close. It is the word for when a long winter finally breaks and the water runs under the ice again, and you feel it first before you hear it. The deep moving of something that had gone still. That is what she gave me. I am an old man now. I will not tell you how old because it is more than I expected to be, and I do not want to tempt the land's patience. The camp has changed. The world has changed around us in ways that I could not have imagined in 1881, and most of them have not been changes I would have chosen. But I am still here, still the man who does not look away. Mabel is beside me. She has white in her hair now, she has had it for years, early, the way some people go white early, and it looks right on her. It looks like what it is, the color of a person who has been through things and arrived on the other side of them. She walks more slowly than she used to, not because she is giving anything up, but because she has learned over the years that there is no advantage to rushing the good parts of a day. She still has that small wooden box, the coin from Missouri, the button, the drawing. Last winter I asked her if I could see the drawing again. She had shown it to me once, years ago, and she took it out and unfolded it carefully, and it was a woman on a horse, done in pencil by someone who was not an artist but was trying, the horse a little too large and the woman a little too upright, and both of them somehow entirely real in the way that sincere attempts at something often are. She said he was a cowboy named Harlan, out of Texas. He drew it for me in Calvert, must have been when I was 20-something. He said I looked like a woman who should be on a horse. I said he was right. She smiled. She has a smile that comes slowly and means exactly what it looks like it means. Not performed, not offered to smooth anything over, just the real thing when something reaches her. She folded the drawing back carefully and put it in the box. I reached over and took her hand, the same hand I had taken at the edge of the canyon the evening she said yes. The skin of it rougher now, the years in it. Still the most real thing I hold. Outside the lodge the wind was coming off the plain the way it does in winter, not violent, just steady, the way this country is when it is being itself and not trying to prove anything. The horses were in the shelter. The camp was quiet. My grandson, Chayton's son, a boy of 8 named for my father, was somewhere in the camp making the particular noise that 8-year-old boys make when they have nothing to do, and the energy of 7 lifetimes in their body. I thought this is what it is to have what you need, not what you expected, not what the world told you to want, what you actually need, the woman who sees you, the ground under your feet, the fire in front of you. Wachintignaka, the pain you carry together until it becomes something else, until it becomes the life. I am still that man, the one who does not look away. She is still the woman who looked at me in that canyon and asked if I was real. I am. We both are.